Continuing the conversation again is something that was uttered a lot over the last year, especially about a year ago at this time. So let's do that. Let's talk about where we are as a society, what George Floyd's murder means to us, and how things have changed. So we have three people who have been kind enough to join us this morning. Janelle Scarrett, Neighborhood Group VP, Vibrant Communities and Poverty Reduction. Good morning, Janelle. Greg Burkett, educator, author, and spoken word artist, is joining us. And Ainsworth Morgan, co-chair, Toronto Police Services Board Anti-Racism Advisory Panel. So we have the story covered from numerous angles here. Good morning to all three of you.
Good morning.
Janelle, I want to start with you. You're a mother of two. You have 6 brothers. A year after the fact, how do you reflect on what happened to George Floyd?
Well, it has been quite a year with this happening. All of a sudden, all of the attention of the world being turned towards us and towards what we have realized in our community as a reality for a long time. It has been a kind of a exposure of that trauma, that historical trauma that our community has experienced, and we were put into a place where we're talking about it, everybody's talking about it, asking us what to do and so on. So it has been a year of it's real reflection, I think, as a community on what do we do about this now that we have a force of the world's attention behind us and with us on it. So some good things, some moments of pause and sort of questioning ourselves, and I think really a reckoning for the rest of us in the world about the reality of racism and the reality that we do have different experiences as people of African descent.
I want to direct this question to Greg. Janelle talked about people live different experiences, and I think it's very important to acknowledge that. Greg, as an educator, we really need to start from the younger generation and to educate as to some of the biases that we do see, conscious, unconscious. How do you think this last year has been in being able to explain things to the younger generation? And maybe they're already seeing it, but to be able to really open their eyes to what's going on.
Yeah, I think this last year actually forced educators to have the conversation in classrooms. Prior to that, I think educators sometimes were able to skirt around it or try to avoid it. But with the murder of Mr. Floyd, it was in your face constantly, and educators had no options but to actually address it with their classrooms. So we had staff meetings where we would actually strategize and talk about how we were going to address it with students, and we had to be really intentional about what we wanted to say and what we wanted to do. As I mentioned before, educators would try to avoid it for various reasons. Sometimes they would try to avoid it because they felt as though they weren't equipped to address some of the questions that students might ask or some of the emotions that this topic might stir up. And I think that's where educating educators is really key with regards to understanding cultural sensitivity, implicit and explicit bias, all those kinds of things. With George Floyd's murder, it also gave educators some language to use in the classroom. All of a sudden, we're hearing words or terms like white supremacy being used in the media, and this gave educators a place to sort of jump off with the discussion, and also phrases and words that they could use to guide very pointed discussions surrounding anti-Black racism and systemic racism as well.
Speaking of educating, Ainsworth is a principal in the Toronto District School Board, along with the work he's doing with the Toronto Police Services Board Anti-Racism Advisory Panel. So Ainsworth, your perspective here is fascinating to me in that the one thing I struggled with after George Floyd's murder was knowing full well that there are good cops out there. There are good people in our police force who want to genuinely help you. And there are others who should be nowhere near a police station. Your work on this panel, what has it unearthed to you? What have you learned?
Thank you very much for that. I think, the work with the Anti-Racism Advisory Panel is incredibly important. The mandate we have is quite large, 81 recommendations that we're asked to implement. What I've learned is that if you don't acknowledge that there's a problem, then it's very difficult to address it. So I think that's the first step. The accountability is huge, but I think Chief Raymer and the service are taking the steps needed. The advisory panel we have is a very diverse group of community members. As I say that I am a member in the Black community. I don't speak for the Black community, but I am a voice in the Black community. So I think that's very important. We all have a role. Nobody wants negative policing anywhere. I'm someone that grew up in Regent Park and had my share of incidents where it comes to bad policing, but I've also had my share of good policing, and I know a lot of good officers out there. And I think that's what's important to ensure that in our work to reform, that we're taking steps to ensure that those that want to do right remain on the force, and those that are out there doing the wrong thing within the force, that we do everything in our power to rid ourselves of them.
Janelle, for you, you have had to deal, you had a number of police interactions, your brother suffering from mental illness. So you have had what you say positive interactions with police. So the idea of detasking versus defunding police, we've heard a lot of these conversations and these terms. What are you in support of?
Most definitely I'm in support of detasking. And I think defunding is just a misunderstood term, because I think that there is a use for policing. But we have to move from law enforcement thinking to thinking about what makes our community safer. What are some of the root causes, and how can we address that? So if our goal becomes community safety instead of law enforcement, we make a shift in the way that we're thinking. And you know, the comment I made about people who have relatives who suffer from mental health issues, they have a choice to make. And in most times, our interaction, our only choice is to call 911 if things get to a point where we're so concerned about our loved one. And I think that's a terrible choice to have to make, knowing that in Toronto, for example, Black men in particular are 20 times more likely to be killed by police than people of other races. So when, you know, I'm faced with that choice, I need help from this force. I need help from these people who I have no choice but to call police, and I shouldn't have to make that kind of a choice. And I think that's what's behind my support for the idea of detasking. It's really about changing the conversation to one where we're talking about how to make our community safer, how to stop mothers, sisters, aunties, fathers, uncles, grandparents, and so on from having to make those very difficult decisions to engage with a force that they're not sure is about safety, because it seems to be more about enforcement. And that's been the experience, to be honest.
It is definitely not something that's going to get rectified right away. This conversation needs to continue on multiple fronts, which is why we were elated that all three of you can join us this morning. Janelle, Greg, and Ainsworth, have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This conversation will continue throughout
For
the
sure.
show. So this is just a piece of it. So we do encourage you to please stay tuned. 7:15 right now. Steph, I know you were watching very closely to that conversation and wanted to see how you're doing today.
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay. You know, it's tough. It's definitely a very tough day, and it's a tough conversation, of course, to listen to and to have. But I echo the same sentiments that I'm elated and like I can't believe we're still having this conversation. And I think it's such an important conversation to have, and that is why I'm happy that it's still continuing and that we are still talking about this, because it's not something that's going to go away overnight. So yeah, I have a lot of feelings today, but I will say that I'm happy to see that this conversation is still happening, because I really didn't think it would be.
Is it? It's interesting, Steph, because at the time we're kind of all numb and angry. Mm-hmm. A year after, how would you describe your emotions?
I think the wounds are still there. The wounds are still open. My emotions, I feel, I don't even know how to really put them into words. I will say that, it's become better for me to explain myself without being extremely overtaken by emotion. I think the last couple of times I had conversations surrounding, George Floyd and what happened, it was really difficult to have. But I think that I'm feeling better now to actually have productive conversations to keep people accountable and to see actual change, for sure.
Change, accountability, absolutely, Steph. Thank you so much for that. All right, again, conversation continues. We are going to switch gears. We also have traffic to do.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Is there any traffic today, by the way?
Yeah, you know what?
There is.
It is
Okay.
kind of busy out there today, Mel.